Hello. Life has a way of catching you off guard, doesn't it? That's exactly what happened to me one otherwise uneventful Wednesday evening. I had just arrived home from work, the sound of my heels clicking against the hardwood floor as I entered. The day had been lengthy and draining, and all I yearned for was to unwind in a warm bath, letting the tension melt away. Little did I know that evening would become a pivotal moment, forever changing the course of my life. Be sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue sharing captivating and heartfelt stories like this one. Don't forget to stick around until the end and show your support by liking this video. Trust me, this tale is one you won't want to miss. When I arrived, the house was quiet, which wasn't out of the ordinary. My husband, Thomas, had mentioned earlier that he'd be attending a late meeting. He had been burning the midnight oil recently, working tirelessly to meet an important project deadline. This often left just Logan, Thomas's son from his previous marriage, at home. Logan, 20, was a reserved yet endearing young man who rarely caused any trouble. He worked part-time at the local hardware store and spent most of his free time in his room. While we weren't particularly close, we had a cordial relationship founded on mutual respect. I always considered him someone who valued his personal space and solitude, much like his father. I had grown accustomed to the calmness of the house when it was just the two of us. As I placed my bag on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water, I noticed Logan's pickup truck parked in the driveway. Strange, I thought. He usually worked late shifts. Casually, I called out his name, my voice echoing through the quiet house. No response. I didn't think much of it, assuming he was in his room, possibly listening to music or napping. After finishing my drink, I headed upstairs to change into something more comfortable. After such a demanding day, all I wanted was to rest. As I walked past the bathroom, I caught the faint sound of running water and noticed the door slightly ajar. This struck me as unusual. Logan was meticulous about his privacy and always ensured doors were securely shut, particularly the bathroom door. My curiosity piqued. I hesitated briefly before gently pushing the door open a bit more. What I saw made me stop in my tracks. Logan stood at the sink, his back to me, his posture tense, as though he was deeply engrossed in something. His movements were hurried and awkward. I realized he was shirtless, his pants hanging loosely at his hips, and he seemed to be scrubbing something with a washcloth out of view. The creak of the door startled him. He spun around, his eyes wide with alarm. "Oh my God, I didn't hear you come in," he exclaimed, his voice trembling. I froze, equally shocked. My eyes darted between him and the washcloth, an uneasy feeling settling over me. This was far from what I had anticipated seeing, and guilt washed over me for intruding. "I'm so sorry," I muttered, averting my gaze. "I didn't mean to interrupt." I quickly stepped back, my heart racing as I reached for the doorknob, ready to retreat and give him the privacy he clearly wanted. But before I could close the door, Logan's voice stopped me. "Wait," he pleaded, his tone laden with desperation. "It's not what you think." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Part of me wanted to leave and pretend nothing had happened, but another part was intrigued. His voice didn't carry the defensiveness of someone caught doing something wrong. Instead, it was filled with shame and distress. Against my better judgment, I turned to face him again, keeping my expression neutral. "Okay," I said cautiously. "What's going on?" Logan's eyes dropped to the floor, his cheeks flushed a deep red. He seemed to struggle to find the right words, fumbling with the washcloth in his hands. Finally, he exhaled a long breath and confessed, "I just didn't know who else to turn to." "What do you mean?" I asked gently, my curiosity growing despite the awkwardness of the situation. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "It's personal," he admitted quietly. "I've been dealing with something, and I don't know what to do. Dad's not here, and you're the only person I could think to talk to." His vulnerability caught me off guard. Logan was typically self-reliant, rarely opening up about personal matters. The fact that he was seeking my help gave me pause. I stepped into the bathroom, closing the door slightly to provide us with a bit of privacy. "All right," I said softly, keeping my voice steady. "Why don't you tell me what's going on?" Logan hesitated for a moment before beginning to explain. At first, his words were fragmented and hesitant. He grappled with expressing the pain he was going through. I listened intently, trying to piece together his words. It quickly became clear that this was a sensitive topic, one he felt too awkward to discuss with Dad. As he opened up, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of compassion. Seeking help, especially about something so personal, is never easy. I noticed the tension in his eyes, a visible struggle between wanting assistance and fearing judgment. "All right," I said after a moment of thought. "First of all, it's great that you're paying attention to these things. It shows that you value your well-being. Second, there's no shame in asking questions or seeking advice." Logan looked up at me, gratitude and relief shining in his eyes. "Really? You don't think this is weird?" "Not at all," I assured him. "Everyone wonders about their bodies from time to time. It's perfectly normal." For the next several minutes, I gave him the best advice I could, drawing on my own experience and knowledge. I aimed to keep the conversation as honest and straightforward as possible, avoiding anything that might increase his discomfort. I could tell our chat was a weight off his shoulders, even though it began with some awkwardness. As we continued, the initial tension melted away. Logan seemed to relax, relieved to have someone to confide in. By the end of our conversation, he even managed a faint smile. "Thank you," he said softly, barely above a whisper. "I didn't think I could tell anyone about this." I returned his smile, relieved that the heaviness had lifted. "You're welcome, Logan. Remember, it's always okay to ask for help. Nobody has all the answers." As I stepped out of the bathroom, I was left with a mix of emotions. On the one hand, I felt grateful to be there for Logan when he needed someone to listen. On the other hand, the situation had been so unexpected and out of the ordinary that I wasn't quite sure how to process it. There was something significant about the moment, as if it marked a turning point in our relationship. I just didn't know what it meant or how it might unfold in the days to come. I tried to shake off the strange feeling as I went about my evening, but it lingered in the back of my mind like a shadow. The house was quiet, the only sound being the gentle hum of the air conditioner. Thomas returned home late that night, tired but content, entirely unaware of the unusual conversation that had taken place in his absence. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about the evening's events. Something had shifted, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. All I knew was that life in our home would never feel quite the same again. The days following that unexpected encounter were, in their own way, peculiar. Outwardly, everything seemed normal. Thomas carried on with his routines, Logan kept up with his part-time job and studies, and I continued to juggle my responsibilities at home and work. Yet, beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension between Logan and me, a subtle awareness of each other's vulnerabilities. It wasn't just that we were more mindful of one another. Something deeper had changed. A shift in our relationship had occurred, and I wasn't sure how to navigate it. Logan had always been somewhat elusive, keeping much of his life private. Our interactions, though cordial, had rarely gone beyond surface-level pleasantries. Now, after our conversation in the bathroom, I sensed a newfound connection between us, both unsettling and oddly comforting. I found myself pondering about him more than I probably should, not in a maternal or concerned way, but with a sense of amazement at how I had failed to notice this side of him before. It was as though I was seeing Logan in a completely new light. He wasn't just the reserved young man who often kept to himself. There was a profound emotional depth within him that I was only beginning to grasp. Logan's behavior shifted notably on Friday evening. Thomas had gone out to meet a client, and I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Logan hadn't returned yet from his shift at the hardware store. As I chopped vegetables, I heard the sound of his pickup pulling into the driveway. My hand froze midair, the knife still in my grasp, as I hesitated, unsure of how to greet him. The unease that had settled between us over the past few days had created a wall I didn't know how to break. When the front door opened, I called out, "Hey, Logan," aiming for a casual tone. He didn't reply immediately, but I heard his footsteps approaching the kitchen. He appeared tired but offered a faint smile. "Hey," he said softly, "what's for dinner?" I returned his smile, relieved that he didn't seem as distant as he had been lately. "Just some spaghetti. Are you hungry?" "Yes, I am," he answered, stepping over to grab a glass of water. We ate mostly in silence at first, the only sound being the clinking of forks against plates. Gradually, though, I noticed Logan becoming more at ease. His smiles were less forced, and his posture wasn't as rigid. At one point, he set his fork down, glancing at me with a slight blush on his cheeks. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," he began. I paused, startled but eager to hear more. "And?" I asked gently. "I just wanted to thank you again for listening." I met his gaze, and the sincerity in his voice warmed me. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, unsure of how to reach it, but relieved he felt comfortable enough to share. "Of course, Logan," I replied softly. "I'm glad I could help." A stretch of silence followed, but this time it felt less awkward. For the first time in days, it felt like we were having a real conversation instead of just exchanging polite words. "You've always been kind to me," he said, his voice quieter now. "And I don't want you to think I take it for granted." I nodded, struggling to express how much his words meant. "I know it's not always easy," I said after a moment, "but I'm glad you feel you can talk to me." He smiled, more relaxed now. "I'll try to keep that in mind," he said, reaching for another helping of spaghetti. Dinner gradually became more casual. We discussed his studies, his part-time job, and a new Netflix series we were both following. It was a small step forward, but progress nonetheless. Logan was beginning to open up, even if only in small ways. Later that night, after we finished eating, I stretched out on the couch with a book. Logan retreated to his room, his footsteps light on the floor. As I turned a page, I found myself wondering if he was still reflecting on what we'd discussed. The next few days followed a similar rhythm. Thomas came home later each evening, his work increasingly demanding. Logan, while more comfortable around me, still kept to himself for the most part. Our dinners were brief but meaningful, and I could see him gradually letting his guard down. Still, there was an underlying tension neither of us seemed ready to confront. Then, one quiet evening, about a week after our talk, Logan did something completely unexpected. It was late, nearing bedtime, and I was curled up on the couch watching the latest episode of a drama. Logan suddenly appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I sat up immediately, my heart racing. "Of course, come in." He hesitated for a moment before stepping fully into the room. He looked uneasy, his stance tense, as though unsure of how to begin. "What's on your mind?" I asked softly, hoping to create a safe space for him. Logan shifted his weight from one foot to the other, avoiding my eyes briefly before finally speaking. "I've been reflecting on the things I shared with you, and I feel I need to tell Dad. I'm unsure how, but I believe he must understand what I'm experiencing." I was astonished by his comments. He was more open now than he had been before. This was progress. He was taking responsibility for his feelings and acknowledging that he needed help from Thomas, not just from me. I smiled, hoping to reassure him. "Logan, that's a huge step, and I believe Thomas will appreciate you reaching out to him. It's not easy, but it's crucial." He nodded, his gaze meeting mine. There was a flash of gratitude in his eyes, and I could tell that the decision to talk with Thomas was tough for him, but he had made considerable progress. He whispered gently, "I don't want to make things awkward between us. I know things have been different lately." I shook my head, feeling a surge of affection for him. "It's not strange at all," I said. "Logan, we're family. No matter the situation, we always support each other." He gave me a small smile and nodded before turning to leave. "Thank you for everything," he said over his shoulder as he exited. I exhaled, not realizing I had been holding my breath. I felt a profound sense of pride for him. He was learning to communicate, seek help, and handle his emotions healthily. I couldn't help but feel that I was witnessing a pivotal moment in his development. The next day, Thomas came home from work earlier than usual. I could see exhaustion on his face, but his steps were light as he entered. "Hey," he murmured, dropping his briefcase near the door. "How's everything going?" "Good," I replied, smiling. "However, I think Logan's been reflecting on something." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "He's been more forthcoming lately," I explained, "and he said he wants to talk to you about something important." Thomas's expression softened, showing a mix of worry and anticipation. "I'll talk to him," he said calmly, his voice steady. "Thank you for letting me know." That evening, after dinner, Thomas and Logan sat together in the living room. I couldn't hear much of their conversation, but I saw Logan leaning forward, speaking passionately to his father. Thomas listened intently, his face displaying both concern and affection. I noticed that Logan's transition into adulthood was a crucial turning point in their relationship, and Thomas was ready to meet him there. As the weeks went by, life settled back into its routine. Logan's previously tense demeanor eased. He no longer avoided me, and I could tell he was still processing what had been said, but he seemed lighter and more like himself. Thomas and Logan spent more time together, strengthening their bond, and Thomas was clearly making an effort to be more present for his son. One weekend, Thomas suggested we go on a day trip to the lake. It was his way of building our connection, and I thought it was a wonderful idea. The weather was perfect, with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze. We packed lunch, drove to the lake, and spent the day relaxing and having fun. We swam, played frisbee, and enjoyed the beach. Logan seemed genuinely happy, smiling and joking with Thomas in a way I had never seen before. Watching them interact warmed my heart, and I hoped this trip would mark a meaningful change for all of us. As the sun began to set, casting golden hues over the lake, we sat on the beach, savoring the final moments of the day. Thomas had fallen asleep on a blanket, his snores blending with the sound of the waves. Logan and I sat a few feet apart, gazing at the horizon. "Thank you for coming today," he murmured after a long silence. "It's been nice just spending time together." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. "I'm glad we came. We should do things like this more often." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the ocean. "Yes, I think it helps." We sat in quiet for a little longer, an unspoken understanding filling the stillness. When Thomas awoke, we gathered our things and headed home, filled with laughter and memories from the day. That night, as I lay in bed next to Thomas, I reflected on how far we had come as a family. The past 2 weeks had been challenging, but they also brought us closer in ways I hadn't anticipated. Logan's journey was far from over, but I was confident that he and all of us were heading in the right direction.